Okay, you guys. Hey, it's Mr. Frank. I hope you're all doing well. I've been thinking of you, and uh, I'm sure this is going to be a difficult couple of weeks for everybody, but just do what you can. We're going to move on with new material and try to get through marine invertebrates here before break, so that when and if we get back, we can wrap up with fish, marine mammals, and marine birds. Okay. So for now, we'll run through phyla Arthropoda and Echinodermata. So maybe the thing to do is while you watch this video, pull up the Google Doc and try to fill in the notes, and then create a shared Google Doc with me, a copy of those notes, fill them in, and then share them, and I'll give you credit for that. Okay, so Arthropoda and Echinodermata. We're going to start with marine arthropods and just run through. So those guys are, terrestrial insects and arachnids, things like spiders and insects, of course, scorpions, millipedes as well. All of them have an exoskeleton that supports their muscles, provides means for their muscles to attach and provides for movement. All their appendages are jointed, so jointed legs. And then the body is a number of different segments, depending on the particular class. Okay, so characteristics. Well, the exoskeleton is made of chitin. It's segmented, like we mentioned. All of the arthropods are bilaterally symmetrical. So that means you can divide them in half and they'll have two equal halves. Again, they have appendages or legs that are jointed. When they grow, they need to molt their shell, and then there's a little period of vulnerability there, and they grow a new shell or larger shell. Arthropods are the largest phylum of invertebrates, and the diversity of marine arthropods is pretty high. They have gills. They have walking legs. They also can have swimmerets or swimming legs, and specialized appendages for feeding. Okay, they're strong and they have great mobility. Okay, don't worry about memorizing this too much. This is just kind of a breakdown of the phylum Arthropoda and then the subphyla or phylums, I guess we could say. So just a way of understanding that there's several different subphyla and kind of what each one of those major groups is. Okay, so one subphylum is Crustacea, and you did your invert model project. Some of you did crustaceans, like a lobster or crabs. All right, so they all have gills. Their skeleton is hardened by calcium carbonate that they precipitate from seawater. And we've learned during the course of this year that ocean acidification is making it more difficult for larval forms of things like crustaceans to precipitate that calcium carbonate from the seawater. Okay, so they're vulnerable in an acidifying ocean. Okay, their appendages are specialized for swimming, grasping. They have antennae, like insects do, with sensory functions, so they can sense things. Tend to have an open circulatory system, very complex behavior. Also compound eyes, which we'll look at. And the greatest number of marine arthropods are crustaceans. Okay, there's a Homarus americanus, the American lobster, not the kind that we see here on the Pacific coast. These are more found on the Atlantic Ocean, and they have the large pincers, and these are the ones that we tend to eat. We do eat some spiny lobsters, some Pacific lobsters as well, but these are the ones that are commercially harvested all throughout the East Coast, primarily in the Northeast. Maine is a big lobster harvesting state. Okay, just a view from the underside again. Just looking at the anatomy, we would do a crayfish dissection were we in class, but it looks like that might not be something that can happen right away. So. But you can just see there's jointed or segmented appendages or legs, and they have swimmerets that help them move for locomotion. Okay, copepods, class Copepoda. So these are often zooplankton, small. They're kind of the dominant. That's a typo there. I'll fix that. Zooplankton in marine environments. First pair of antennae, often used for locomotion or for swimming. They're a huge source of food for fish and other crustaceans. And some marine copepods are parasitic and will actually feed off the tissue of other marine organisms like fish. Okay, so Cirripedia or Cirripedia, depending, the barnacles. These, Dylan, you did a great presentation on the barnacles. So these are sessile marine organisms that are fixed to some kind of substrate. Tend to be benthic or on the bottom, or certainly in intertidal zones. They have calcium carbonate shell, so again, vulnerable in an acidifying ocean. They're filter feeders, so they have feet that they put out, cirri, that they put out into the water, and those feet are feathery appendages. They'll actually grab phytoplankton and zooplankton and filter those from the seawater. Okay, so yeah, they can actually attach to crabs, whales, turtles, sea snakes. So they have moving hosts. And then some of the barnacles are actually parasitic and don't have shells as well. Okay, amphipods, isopods, and krill. All right, all in the crustacean group. So I'm sorry, all in the arthropod group. So amphipoda and isopoda, these are the beach fleas, sandhoppers you find out when you're walking on the beach, sea lice, which can infect marine vertebrates, definitely things like whales and different types of fish. Many of these are scavengers, and some, again, are parasitic. Krill are more like shrimp, very important food source, especially in the Arctic and Antarctic regions of the globe. So, near 90 degrees north and 90 degrees south, really between 70 and 90 north and south. Very important food source for whales, penguins, and fish, and really, common in polar waters. We covered that. Okay. Malacostraca, the decapods. Okay, they tend to have 5 pairs of walking legs. First pair of legs, often with pincers. Cephalothorax is covered with a carapace. Posterior in the abdomen, used for swimming, right? And they have a 2-chambered stomach, centralized nervous system. Most of these are scavengers. Okay, so there's all your lobsters and crabs. They're all decapods. They're laterally compressed, so they tend to be relatively flat. Longer abdomens overall. Some of them are free swimming. Most are going to be burrowing and benthic, living on the bottom. Hermit crabs, not really true crabs, but they do tend to have a soft shell, at least in the anterior portion of their bodies, and they'll use shells from other marine organisms as their protection. Okay. Other crabs, most of the crabs are going to move sideways. Some can be pretty fast, even on land. And they can survive exposed to the air for long periods of time. Most crabs are going to be intertidal organisms where they're exposed to air for periods during low tide. All right, Chelicerata, one more arthropod subphylum. These guys are like horseshoe crabs. So no jaws, no antennae. Merostomata are the horseshoe crabs, and they have a horseshoe-shaped carapace that gives them their name. 5 pairs of legs, well represented in the fossil record. Many different species were living for millions of years, but now there's only 4 different species alive, so they're kind of fossil remnants. Only found on the East Coast. We don't have horseshoe crabs out west here. And Pycnogonidia, or Pycnogonida, sea spiders. They have 4 pairs of legs, 4 or more, and they tend to feed on soft invertebrates, even things like nudibranchs. Okay, and Uniramia, class Insecta, the insects, and very, very abundant on land in terrestrial environments, very rare as marine organisms. There are very few Uniramia that are marine, fully marine. So Pontomaya or Pontomia is the midge that lives as a larva submerged in Pacific tide pools. But this insect even emerges to mate and lay eggs. All right, that's it for arthropods. We're going to move on to echinoderms. Again, pause the notes anywhere along the process here and fill in as needed, or go back if I'm going too fast. All right, echinoderms. We looked at these already. You guys had a sub and looked at echinoderms, so you're probably familiar. They're radially symmetrical, so they tend to, instead of bilateral symmetry, they're radially symmetrical, so they tend to have round body plans. You can almost think of them as, can be sliced like pizza, and you're going to have a number of different, ways that you can get even cuts. All right, like the polyps and medusa, they have an oral aboral orientation. They basically have a oral surface, which is often the side that's facing down, scraping algae off rocks, and aboral is their backside. So oral aboral, not really anterior posterior like fish or the arthropods. Endoskeleton, and we'll look at that. They also have a water vascular system. This is how they move nutrients and dissolved gases like oxygen around for cellular respiration. Movements are controlled by contracting muscles, and they create these pressure gradients. They tend to be relatively slow moving. Most of them are benthic, meaning, again, they live on the bottom. And they have a neural net rather than a brain in the sense that we think of brains. So a cluster of neurons around a net. Yep, and there are male and female echinoderms, but they tend to reproduce externally by broadcasting their gametes into the seawater and having the gametes meet up with each other externally outside the body. Okay, a class of echinoderms, Asteroidea, the sea stars, tend to have 5 arms around a central disc. They can move in any direction. Their endoskeleton is calcium carbonate, again, rendering them vulnerable in acidifying oceans. Pedicellary, mini pincers on their aboral surface. Okay, so this is partly how they're obtaining food. Tube feet have suckers for movement, almost in the way that marine, like a mollusk, like an octopus would have. They're predatory, tend to, encroach slow-moving organisms, things like bivalve, snails, barnacles. They'll extrude their stomach through their mouth, engulf their prey, and then bring their stomach back into their body, which is kind of a fascinating feeding strategy. They reproduce asexually. If part of them breaks off, that's kind of like budding. That can often regenerate an entire organism. Also, if they lose an arm, they can regrow an arm. Okay, Ophiuroidea. I'm at brittle stars. Ophiuroidea. There we go. Arms are long and flexible. The feet tend not to have suckers. They feed on organic particles. They hide under rocks, corals, and different sediments. We have lots of brittle stars off the coast of California and the west coast of the United States. Beautiful, very, actually for a star or a cousin of the star, they're fairly fast moving. Okay, Echinoidea, the sea urchins. Again, endoskeleton forms something called a test. That's this here. This is a test where this is sort of the remnants or the remains of their endoskeleton after the organism has died. So it's called TEST, test. All the spines have fallen off. They have tube feet like sea stars do, suckers. They have a mouth on the underside, so the oral surface called Aristotle's lantern. And it's a complex system of jaws and muscles. They tend to use that for grazing on algae and anything that's dead matter, organic matter on the bottom. Some echinoidians are adapted to live in soft sediments. Their bodies tend to be flattened. Spines tend to be shortened. That's sand dollars are a good example of that. Okay, Holothuroidea. That's what I was going for earlier. So the sea cucumbers, no spines at all, worm-like. Sort of look like a cucumber body plan. Not obviously radially symmetrical, but they are. That they have radial symmetry. Endoskeleton is inside there. It has microscopic calcareous spicules. So calcareous again, calcium carbonate. Tend to be feeding on deposits. A lot of times they're feeding on waste, or material that's organic material. Maybe it's detritus, something that's died and sunk, settled to the bottom. They'll move their tube feet around their mouth. They have defense mechanisms. Some produce toxic substances. Others, and many on the West Coast here, do this thing called evisceration, where they can actually expel their internal organs through their mouth or the anus to distract predators. They can lose up to 90% of their internal organs, the mass, and then if they can get away, they can crawl under a rock and then gradually grow those organs back or regenerate them. Oh, Crinoidea, the class Crinoidea. So these are the feather stars and sea lilies. We have some great video clips on the Power School page of different crinoids moving in the water, free swimming. Again, they're suspension feeders, so they're filtering particles out of the water, things like phytoplankton, zooplankton. They are motile, so they can be free swimming. Check out one of those video clips. They're short, but they tend to also attach to the bottom. And many times divers will mistake them for coral colonies or even marine alga. That's it. Okay, so I went kind of quickly there. Hopefully you were able to hang in and get some notes, from that. And on Friday's class, we'll run through one of the next invertebrate groups in a similar way here. And we're on this format, we're not going to be able to do any assessments, so I'll just count your notes as demonstrating understanding of this material. All right, I miss you. Take care, you guys.